Have you ever been the one person in your family everyone writes off? The one they look at with pity during every family dinner, Christmas, or reunion? For years, that was me. They thought I was a nobody, a failure. They were about to find out how wrong they were. And it was going to happen in front of everyone. The air in my Uncle Rick and Aunt Carol's house was always the same on Christmas Eve. A suffocating mix of pine needles and superiority. It clung to the heavy velvet curtains and settled on the perfectly polished mahogany table. To them, this was the smell of success. To me, it was the smell of judgment. I stood near the roaring fireplace, trying to make myself as small as possible. But my cousin Brittany had a heat-seeking missile for vulnerability, and she had locked onto me the moment I walked through the door. "Skylar. Oh my God, I almost didn't recognize you," she chirped, her voice loud enough for everyone in the living room to hear. She glided over, her red sequin dress shimmering under the chandelier. She looked me up and down, her nose wrinkling at my simple black dress. It was the nicest thing I owned, but next to her, I felt like a shadow. "Is that new?" "It's simple. It's comfortable, Brittany," I said, my voice quiet. "Right. Comfort," she laughed, a tinkling sound that grated on my nerve. "So, are you still doing that little computer hobby of yours? Mom said you were working from home. Is it like data entry or something?" I felt the familiar heat rise in my cheeks. "It's software development," I started to explain, but she had already waved a dismissive hand, her attention caught by someone more important across the room. I was dismissed. A non-entity. Just another piece of furniture in a house I never felt welcome in. Dinner was even worse. I was seated at the far end of the table, next to a distant cousin I'd never met, who seemed just as uncomfortable as I was. Across from me, my dad, David Vance, sat beside his older brother, my Uncle Rick. Dad was a gentle soul, a man who believed in keeping the peace at all costs, which meant he never ever stood up to Rick. He just absorbed the insults directed at me, with a pained, apologetic wince, as if his silence was a shield. But it wasn't. It was an endorsement. Grandma Maeve, my dad's mother and the only one who ever looked at me with something other than pity, sat at the head of the table. She was quiet tonight, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She caught my gaze and gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent message of solidarity that I clung to like a lifeline. Then came the main event, Uncle Rick's toast. He loved the sound of his own voice, especially when it was recounting his own successes. He stood, his crystal glass held high, his portly frame exuding a smug satisfaction that filled the room. "To family," he began, beaming, "and to success. This has been a banner year for Sterling Manufacturing. And a banner year for the Sterling." He winked at his wife, my Aunt Carol, who beamed back at him. "Our Brittany here," he said, gesturing to his daughter, "just got another promotion in marketing. A real star. She's a doer, this one." The table erupted in polite applause. Brittany preened, lapping up the attention. "And we have Skylar, of course," Rick continued, his eyes finally landing on me at the forgotten end of the table. The shift in his tone was immediate, dropping from pride to condescension. "Still trying to find her way. We all have our fingers crossed for you, kiddo." A few polite, pitying chuckles rippled around the table. My own dad chuckled along, a weak, hollow sound. I felt my stomach clench. He called me a sweet girl, but the implication hung in the air, thick and poisonous. I was a failure, a project, a problem to be solved. I was the family's official loser. Later, as people mingled with dessert, I made a fatal mistake. I saw a small opening, a lull in the conversation, and I tried to connect with him. I approached my uncle, my heart thumping nervously. "Uncle Rick," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "What you said about doers. I'm actually working on something. A new software idea. It's for logistics." He turned, a half-eaten cannoli in his hand, and he put his other hand on my shoulder. It wasn't a comforting gesture. It was a gesture of dismissal, a way to physically hold me in place while he delivered his verdict. "Skylar," he said, his voice laced with that infuriating, gentle pity. That's nice. It's good to have hobbies, but the world, the real world, needs doers, not dreamers. It's a harsh truth, but someone has to tell you. Sterling Manufacturing was built on grit and steel, not on little computer dreams. He patted my shoulder twice. Hard. You're a smart girl. Don't waste. And then he walked away, leaving me standing there, feeling every inch the useless nobody they all thought I was. I looked across the room, desperate for some kind of support, and saw my dad. He had watched the whole thing. He met my eyes for a fraction of a second, before looking down at his shoes, his face a portrait of spineless shame. He wouldn't say a word. He never did. That was it. That was the final crack in the dam. I couldn't breathe in that house anymore. I quietly found my coat, slipped out the front door without saying goodbye, and stepped into the cold December night. The sound of their laughter followed me down the driveway, the sound of a happy family I was effectively banned from, a club whose password I would never know. As I drove home, tears of anger and humiliation blurring the festive lights, I made a promise to the reflection of the hollow-eyed girl in the rearview mirror. This was the last time they would mock me, the last time I would be excluded, the last time they would make me feel poor in spirit and small in my own life. This was the last Christmas they would ever know me as their failure. The war had just begun. The days that followed Christmas were a thick, gray fog of shame and fear. I replayed my uncle's words over and over in my head, each syllable a fresh cut. Doers, not dreamers, little computer dreams. His voice echoed in the suffocating silence of my tiny apartment, a space that suddenly felt less like a home and more like a cell. The peeling paint on the walls and the flickering fluorescent light in the kitchen seemed to mock me, physical proof of my status as the family. Nobody. I was 24 years old, and all I had to show for it was a half-finished software program and a mountain of their condescension. I spent hours just sitting in front of my laptop, the screen glowing in the dark room. The lines of code stared back at me, thousands of lines that represented my little hobby. It was an AI-driven logistics platform designed to untangle and optimize the outdated supply chains of legacy companies, like Sterling Manufacturing. It was a brilliant idea. I knew it was, but an idea without resources is just a ghost, and I was running on fumes. My part-time data entry job, the very one Brittany had mocked, barely paid my rent and my grocery bills. Hope was becoming a luxury I couldn't afford. This was my tangible struggle, a daily grind of fear and desperation. I gathered what little financial history I had and walked into a bank to apply for a small business loan. The loan officer, a man in a cheap suit with tired eyes, listened to my pitch with a practiced air of patience. I showed him my business plan, my projections, the beta version of the software. When I was done, he gave me a sad, tight-lipped smile. It was the exact same look my uncle gave me, the look of pity. "Ms. Vance," he said, sliding my papers back across the desk. "It's an interesting concept, but it's high risk. You have no collateral, no proven revenue stream. I'm sorry, but we can't approve this at this time." Rejected. The word landed like a physical blow. I walked out of the bank feeling smaller and more defeated than ever. That night, I hit my lowest point. The weight of their disbelief, now reinforced by the cold, hard reality of the financial world, was crushing me. For a moment, I gave up. I actually opened a web browser and started searching for real jobs, for administrative assistant positions, for anything stable and soul-crushing that would get my family off my back. The feeling of utter defeat was a bitter pill in the back of my throat. In a moment of weakness, I called my dad. I just needed one person, just one, to tell me not to quit. I didn't even tell him about the loan rejection. I just said I was feeling a little lost. "Oh, honey," he said, his voice full of that gentle, useless sympathy. "You know, maybe Rick has a point. He can be harsh, but he's a successful man. He just wants what's best for you. Maybe looking for something more stable isn't such a bad idea." His words were meant to be kind, but they were the cruelest cut of all. He wasn't my ally. He was Rick's ambassador. His enabling silence had found its voice, and it was telling me to surrender. I hung up the phone, a fresh wave of betrayal washing over me. I was completely and utterly alone in this. I walked over to my laptop and closed the lid with a definitive snap. The screen went dark, and in the reflection, I saw the face of a failure. I was on the very edge of letting them win. A week passed in that gray haze. I barely ate. I barely coded. I was adrift. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang with a number I knew by heart. Grandma May. "I haven't heard from you, dear," she said, her voice clear and strong, cutting through my stupor. "Is everything all right?" Her simple question broke something open in me. "No," I whispered. "No, it's not. I'll put the kettle on," she said. "Come over." An hour later, I was sitting in her cozy, sunlit kitchen, a cup of chamomile tea, warming my hands. The house smelled of lavender and old books, a comforting scent that was the complete opposite of Rick and Carol's sterile mansion. For the first time since that awful Christmas Eve dinner, I let it all out. I told her everything: the constant mockery from Brittany, the soul-crushing condescension from Rick, the lone rejection from the bank, and worst of all, the spineless, heartbreaking betrayal of my own father's words. I cried, ugly, heaving sobs of a woman who had hit rock bottom. Grandma Maeve didn't interrupt. She didn't shush me or offer platitudes. She just listened, her hands folded on the floral tablecloth, her eyes, the same shade of blue as mine, sharp and incredibly intelligent. When I was finally done, my voice hoarse and my tears spent, she didn't offer me a hug or a tissue. She offered me a spine. "Your grandfather, God rest his soul," she began, her voice firm. "He saw the future. He was always tinkering, always inventing, always looking at what could be. Your Uncle Rick, he only sees the past. He polishes the trophies his father won and calls it success. And your father, your poor, sweet father, David, sees nothing at all. He's too afraid to look." She leaned forward, her gaze locking onto mine. "The question is, Skylar, who do you want to be?" Before I could answer, she stood up and walked over to an old, dark wood secretary desk in the corner of the room. She unlocked a small drawer with a tiny brass key and pulled out a simple white envelope. She walked back to the table and placed it in front of me. My name was written on it in her elegant, looping script. I looked at her, confused. She nodded for me to open it. My hands trembled as I tore the seal. Inside was a cashier's check. My eyes widened as I read the number. $50,000. I gasped, looking up at her. "Grandma, I can't. It's your inheritance," she said, cutting me off. "A little early, I'll grant you. Your grandfather left it for a day when one of his own needed a real chance. Rick doesn't need it, and David wouldn't know what to do with it. It's for you." She reached across the table and placed her warm, wrinkled hand over mine. "Don't you dare let those fools win. Don't you dare let their small minds shrink your big dreams. This is not a gift, Skylar. It's an investment. I'm investing in you. Now you go out there and you build your empire, and one day you'll make them see." The air in the kitchen felt electric. Her words, her faith, the tangible weight of the check in my hand. It was a defibrillator to my dying ambition. This wasn't just money. This was belief. This was a weapon. This was the beginning of my secret transformation. I walked out of her house that afternoon with the check clutched in my hand, my back straight for the first time in weeks, my purpose blazing like a forge. The war wasn't over. It had just been funded. The $50,000 from Grandma Maeve wasn't just a lifeline. It was fuel. It ignited a fire in me that burned away all the doubt and hesitation. I was no longer a victim of my family's narrative. I was the author of my own. I went into what I privately called my secret war. The first casualty was my old life. I walked into my data entry job the next morning and quit on the spot. The look of surprise on my manager's face was the first small taste of freedom. My apartment, once a prison of despair, became my command center. I worked 18-hour days, fueled by cheap coffee and a burning need to prove them all wrong. The tangible struggle was still very real. I lived on instant noodles and slept on a mattress on the floor to make every dollar of grandma's investment count. But now, it was a struggle filled with purpose, not desperation. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building. After 2 months of relentless solitary work, I knew I couldn't do it alone. The software was becoming too complex. I needed another mind, another pair of hands. I put out a carefully worded ad on a niche tech forum, looking for a brilliant coder who was tired of the corporate grind. I received dozens of applications, but one stood out. His name was Jasper Kane. His resume was a paradox. He'd been a senior engineer at a top-tier tech giant, but his tenure had been short. A quick search revealed he'd been fired for being, in his old CEO's words, too disruptive and unwilling to adhere to established protocols. He was my guy. I met him in a dingy coffee shop. He was tall, lanky, with a restless energy, and eyes that seemed to be processing the world 5 steps ahead of everyone else. I didn't give him a sales pitch. I just opened my laptop and showed him the code. I walked him through the architecture of Ethereal Logistics, my name, for the company. He was silent for a full 10 minutes, his eyes scanning the lines of code, his brow furrowed in concentration. I held my breath. Finally, he looked up from the screen, and for the first time, his restless eyes were completely still. "This isn't just disruptive," he said, his voice low with awe. "This is a revolution. This will make entire swaths of the logistics industry obsolete." Who is funding this?" "An angel investor," I said simply. "And she wants to remain anonymous." That's when I laid out my one, non-negotiable condition. I need to remain anonymous too, completely. I need a public face for the company, someone to be the charismatic frontman, the COO. You. He leaned back, studying me. You build a potential billion-dollar company, and you want to stay in the shadows? Why? Let's just say I'm running a long-term experiment, I told him. And I don't want the subjects to know they're being observed. A slow grin spread across his face. He got it. He saw the beautiful, chaotic potential. "I'm in," he said, extending a hand. "When do we start?" We shook on it, and Jasper Kane became my first employee, my COO, and my most trusted confidant. We moved out of my apartment and into a small, windowless office in a shared workspace building, the kind of place where dreams were either born or died. He became the public face of Ethereal Logistics. He took the meetings. He made the calls. He built the buzz. My name was never mentioned. It didn't appear on the incorporation documents, on the website, or in any press. I was a ghost, the boss in the shadows. One evening, my dad called. The family was getting curious about my sudden silence. "So what's this new job, Sky?" he asked, his voice laced with a hopeful anxiety. "Brittany said you quit the other one." I took a deep breath. The lie had to be perfect. "It's good, Dad. A remote admin job for a tech company. It's stable, good pay." I could hear the relief in his sigh. "Oh, that's wonderful, honey. That's great news. See, I told you things would work out if you just found something practical." It stung. It stung that his version of my success was a boring, stable, invisible job, but his ignorance was my shield. Let them think I was a secretary. Let them think I was a failure, who had finally settled. The longer they underestimated me, the more spectacular the reveal would be. Months bled into one another. The initial investment from Grandma Maeve was nearly gone. We were running on fumes again. A familiar and terrifying feeling. Jasper and I were working around the clock, pitching our software to anyone who would listen. We got 100 no's, 100 doors slammed in our faces. The pressure was immense. There were nights I'd just stare at the ceiling, the numbers running through my head. calculating how many days we had left before we had to shut it all down. The thought of having to go back to my grandmother and tell her I'd lost all her money was a horror I couldn't bear. Then, we got a mid-sized regional distributor. A family-owned company called Pioneer Freight was struggling. Their systems were a mess, and they were losing ground to bigger competitors. They were desperate. Jasper, with his infectious confidence, managed to get us in the door. I stayed back at the office, feeding him data and strategies through an earpiece, a ghost in the machine. They agreed to a trial run, a small 6-week pilot program. The stakes were everything. If this failed, Etheria Logistics was dead. The day the pilot went live, neither Jasper nor I slept. We watched the data pour in, our hearts in our throats. And then, it happened. It worked. It didn't just work. It was a miracle. Our AI untangled decades of logistical knots in a matter of hours. Their delivery times were cut in half. Their fuel costs plummeted. Their error rate dropped to almost zero. The owner of Pioneer Freight, a grizzled old man who had built the company with his bare hands, called Jasper personally. He was practically in tears. "Your company, your software, you saved us," he'd said, his voice thick with emotion. That was the turning point. That was the first domino. Pioneer Freight signed a massive 5-year contract. We weren't just solvent anymore. We were profitable. Word of mouth in the tight-knit logistics industry is faster than any marketing campaign. Whispers started to spread about a mysterious new firm, Etheria Logistics, and its brilliant, charismatic COO, Jasper Kane, who seemed to have come out of nowhere with a revolutionary piece of tech. Our quiet success meant I was still in my family's eyes, Skylar the nobody, which meant I was still expected to show up to mandatory family functions. My Aunt Carol's birthday party was held at a stuffy country club. I wore the same simple black dress from Christmas, mostly to annoy Brittany, and it was there I met him. Logan Hayes. Brittany brought him over to me, with the air of a queen, presenting her crown jewels. "Skylar, I want you to meet my fiancé, Logan," she said, her arm looped possessively through his. He was not what I expected. He wasn't a vapid trophy like Brittany's past boyfriends. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, and had the kind of sharp, analytical eyes that saw everything. He was a partner at a venture capital firm. He was in a different league entirely. "A pleasure," he said, shaking my hand. His grip was firm, his gaze direct. "Skylar's my cousin," Brittany explained to him, a familiar note of condescension in her voice. "She's in tech support, or something like that." "I'm a remote administrator," I said, delivering my cover story with a placid smile. Logan nodded politely, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. It was a brief, almost imperceptible moment of dissonance. He was a man who assessed people for a living, and I could tell that my simple, unassuming cover story didn't quite line up with the way I held his gaze, or the way I analyzed the room. He was the neutral observer, a new, unpredictable variable in my family's toxic equation. As Brittany dragged him away to show him off to someone more important, I saw him glance back at me over his shoulder, a thoughtful, curious expression on his face. He was a puzzle piece that didn't fit, and for the first time, I realized my secret war might soon have a witness. The success of the Pioneer Freight contract was like a tidal wave. Money and momentum were finally on our side. We moved out of the windowless box and into a sleek, modern office with actual views of the city. We hired a dozen of the brightest engineers and data scientists we could find. People like Jasper who were hungry and brilliant and are underestimated. Etheria Logistics was becoming a force, a name whispered with a mix of awe and fear in boardrooms across the country. But my life remained unchanged. I kept my small apartment. I drove my 10-year-old sedan. I still bought my clothes from discount stores. The secrecy was my armor and my greatest weapon. To my family, I was still just Skylar, the quiet cousin with the boring remote job. My anonymity was absolute. One rainy Tuesday morning, An email from Jasper landed in my inbox with the subject line, "You're going to want to see this." Attached was a confidential industry report from a major financial analyst. It was a deep dive into the legacy manufacturing sector, and one name was highlighted in red throughout the document: Sterling Manufacturing. I read it, my heart starting to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. The report was brutal. My uncle's company was a dinosaur on the verge of extinction. Their technology was ancient, their supply chain was a chaotic mess, and they were bleeding clients to more agile, modern competitors. Their stock had lost 60% of its value in the last year. They were hemorrhaging money, and the report concluded that without a massive, immediate technological overhaul and a capital infusion, they would be bankrupt within 18 months. The final paragraph was the kill shot. It stated that Sterling Manufacturing was actively and desperately seeking a partnership with a cutting-edge tech firm to save them from collapse. A cold, clear, and absolutely perfect sense of opportunity washed over me. It wasn't just an opportunity for my business, it was poetic justice served on a silver platter. The company that was built on grit and steel, the company my uncle had used as a weapon to beat me down, was now on its knees, praying for a savior, and that savior was going to be me. This was the opening. This was the moment I had been working towards, dreaming of, since that humiliating Christmas Eve. The board was set. The pieces were in place. I called Jasper into my office. My office was at the back of the building with no name on the door. To most of our employees, I was just a senior data analyst who kept to herself. "Read this," I said, sliding my tablet across the desk. He read the report, his expression shifting from curiosity to a slow, predatory grin. He looked up at me, his eyes gleaming. "Oh, this is beautiful. This is Shakespearean." "They're desperate," I said. "Which means they're vulnerable, but he can't know it's me." "Not yet." "Of course not," Jasper said, already pacing. "The reveal has to be public. It has to be painful. I want you to prepare a proposal," I instructed him. "The best one we've ever made, but we're not going to approach them directly. It's too suspicious. We'll go through an investment bank, one we've worked with before. They'll act as the intermediary. Rick Sterling will see a proposal from a respected bank, representing a highly successful anonymous tech partner. He'll be so desperate for the lifeline he won't even question who's holding the rope." The power shift was palpable. For years he held all the power, all the money, all the influence. Now, I was the one in the driver's seat, and he didn't even know I was in the car. The hunter was about to become the prey. The game was on. 2 weeks later, my phone buzzed with a number I recognized instantly. "Britain." I let it ring 3 times before answering, projecting an air of mild inconvenience. "Skylar? Oh good," you answered. "I was worried you'd be busy with your work," she began, her voice a symphony of condescending sweetness. It was the voice she used when she was about to ask for a favor or deliver a backhanded compliment. "Hi Brittany, what's up?" I asked, keeping my own voice flat and neutral. "Well, I have the most exciting news. You know how Dad's company has been having a bit of a tough time lately," she said, glossing over the near catastrophic collapse of their family legacy. "Well, that's all over. We've found a partner. A truly incredible tech company that's going to come in and save everything. It's a huge deal." I could hear the relief and excitement in her voice. She had no idea she was talking to the architect of her family's salvation. "That's great news for your dad," I said calmly. "It's great news for all of us," she corrected. "And to celebrate, Sterling Manufacturing is hosting its 50th anniversary gala. It's also going to be the official partner announcement party. It's going to be the biggest event of the year." She paused for dramatic effect, and Dad pulled some strings to get you a seat. "I'm calling to personally invite you." The gilded invitation. The perfect stage. It was happening even faster than I'd planned. A high-stakes family gathering, a public reunion, filled with all the people who had witnessed my past humiliations. It was perfect. "You have to come," she pressed on, sensing my silence. "And please, Skylar, try to look nice. Logan will be there, and all of Dad's important colleagues. We really want to make a good impression." The irony was so thick, so rich, I nearly laughed out loud. She wanted me to look nice to impress the people I was about to financially dominate. She was worried about making a good impression on the night her family's world was going to be turned completely upside down by her useless cousin. "Of course, Brittany," I said, my voice smooth as glass. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." "Oh good, it's at the Grand Monarch Resort, the main ballroom. 8 o'clock sharp. Don't be late," she said, and hung up without saying goodbye. I leaned back in my chair, the phone still in my hand. My heart was pounding, a frantic drumbeat of terror and wild, savage exhilaration. The final test was set. The invitation wasn't just to a party. It was an invitation to the final act of a play I had been writing in secret for years. And the Sterling family was about to discover that I wasn't just in the cast. I owned the entire theater. The night of the gala, the reflection in my full-length mirror was a stranger. It was me, but it wasn't. The woman looking back wasn't the quiet, defeated girl who had fled her uncle's Christmas party. This woman's eyes were clear and steady. She was wearing a dark blue suit, the fabric a deep, midnight color. It wasn't a dress meant to be pretty or to blend in. It was armor, simple, impeccably tailored and powerful. But as I adjusted the cuff of my sleeve, a sudden cold wave of doubt washed over me. My stomach twisted into a knot. Could I really do this? Could I stand in front of all of them? My uncle, my aunt, my cousin, my father, and detonate the bomb I had so carefully built? For a moment, the weight of the impending confrontation felt too heavy to bear. It's one thing to plan a war in secret, it's another to walk onto the battlefield. My hand trembled as I picked up my phone and dialed Jasper. He was already at the venue, my eyes and ears on the ground. "Status report," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "The ballroom is packed," Jasper's voice came through the phone, crisp and clear. "It's exactly as we pictured. The Sterling Manufacturing logo is everywhere. And your uncle, he's walking around like he's king of the world, shaking hands, slapping backs. He's peacocking for the whole room." I took a deep, shaky breath. "Jasper, I don't know if I can do this." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then his voice came back, lower, firmer. "Skylar, listen to me. You earned this. You built this from nothing while they laughed at you. You slept on the floor and lived on coffee so this company could live. This isn't just revenge. This is justice. This isn't just for you. It's for every person who was ever called a dreamer, a nobody, a failure. You aren't just the owner of Ethereal Logistics. You're the victor of this whole damn story. Now get down here, boss." His words were the steel I needed for my spine. Boss. He'd never called me that out loud before. It was the final push, the reminder of who I was now. "I'm on my way," I said, my voice steady again. I hung up the phone. The doubt was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't dressing for their approval. I was dressing for war. There was a soft knock on my apartment door. I opened it to see Grandma Maeve. She was dressed in an elegant, deep purple gown, a silver shawl draped over her shoulders. She looked magnificent. Her sharp eyes took in my suit, my posture, my face. She didn't say a word. She just smiled, and there were tears of pure, unadulterated pride welling in her eyes. "Your grandfather would have been so proud," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She held out her arm. "Shall we, Skylar?" I took her arm, my +1 for the evening, my secret investor, my one true ally. Together we walked out into the night, 2 generations of Vance women, on our way to claim what was ours. The Grand Monarch Resort ballroom was a glittering cavern of crystal and gold. Massive chandeliers cast a warm, expensive glow over hundreds of guests in tuxedos and evening gowns. The Sterling Manufacturing logo, a stylized S inside a gear, was projected onto the walls and printed on every cocktail napkin. The air buzzed with champagne-fueled chatter. It was a celebration of a legacy, a 50th anniversary. But I knew it was a funeral. My arrival with Grandma Maeve did not go unnoticed. We were an anomaly in the sea of corporate sharks and their glamorous wives. My family, holding court at a large central table, spotted us immediately. I watched the sequence of reactions like a scientist observing a chemical chain reaction. First, Aunt Carol's eyes narrowed, her gaze sweeping over my severe blue suit with undisguised disdain. She leaned over and whispered something in Brittany's ear. Brittany, resplendent in a gold dress that screamed, "Look at me," turned, saw me, and let out a small, cruel giggle. Then Uncle Rick, the man of the hour, detached himself from a group of business associates and strode toward us, a magnanimous, false smile plastered on his face. "Skylar, glad you could make it," he boomed, his voice carrying. He gave Grandma Maeve a perfunctory air kiss. "And Maeve, good to see you. Looking lovely as always." His attention snapped back to me, and his smile tightened into something more familiar. That infuriating, patronizing smirk. He gestured to the men he'd just been speaking with, drawing me into their circle. "This wasn't a welcome, it was an ambush. Everyone," he announced, his voice dripping with condescension. "I'd like you to meet my brilliant niece, Skylar." Still chasing those little computer dreams, he winked, as if sharing an inside joke at my expense. "Maybe you can get some inspiration tonight, see what a real company looks like when it's making real moves." The men, his colleagues, all offered weak, polite smiles in my direction. They were his audience, and he was putting on a show. A show about the big, successful executive and his poor, lost little niece. "We're about to be saved by a tech genius," he continued, putting a heavy hand on my shoulder. "The COO of our new partner firm is a real visionary. Maybe he'll give you an internship if you ask nicely." The men chuckled. It wasn't a mean laugh, just a casual, dismissive one, the kind men like them reserve for women they don't take seriously. My skin prickled. From across the room, I saw my dad at the family table. He was staring intently at his water glass, tracing the rim with his finger, the ultimate enabler in his natural habitat invisible. He wouldn't look at me. He was actively choosing not to see my public humiliation. My gaze swept the crowd, and for a split second, my eyes met Logan Hayes. He was standing next to Brittany, holding a glass of champagne, a perfect statue of neutral elegance. But his eyes were not neutral. They were locked on this entire exchange. His expression was unreadable, a mask of polite interest, but I could see the gears turning behind his eyes. He wasn't just watching, he was analyzing. He was taking in Rick's blustering performance, my calm stillness, my father's deliberate ignorance. He was the neutral observer, witnessing the final brutal scene, before the curtain rose on a new reality. The humiliation was sharp, public, and delivered with the casual cruelty of a man who had never been challenged. It was exactly what I had expected. It was the last piece of fuel I needed for the fire. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I simply held my uncle's gaze and allowed a small, knowing smile to touch my lips. He mistook it for nervous submission. He had no idea it was the smile of a predator that had just cornered its prey. He squeezed my shoulder one last time, a gesture of dominance, and turned back to his friends, my dismissal complete. The final insult had been delivered. The trap was now set. The lights in the ballroom dimmed slightly, and a hush fell over the crowd as Uncle Rick, glowing with self-importance, took to the stage. He tapped the microphone, and the sound echoed through the cavernous space. He was in his element, the center of attention, the patriarch presiding over his domain. "Friends, colleagues, family," he began, his voice booming with false sincerity. 50 years ago, my father, Robert Sterling, founded this company with little more than a dream and a single workshop. He built it on the bedrock of American values, tradition, hard work, and a commitment to quality. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. He spoke of legacy, of the company's history, of the challenges of the modern world. He was painting a picture of a noble institution weathering a storm, and he was casting himself as the steadfast captain. And yes, he said, his voice dropping into a more somber, confidential tone, we have faced headwinds. The market has changed, the world has changed, but sterling manufacturing does not break. We adapt, we evolve. He straightened up, his chest puffing out. The triumphant part of the speech was coming. And tonight, our future is secure. Tonight, we begin a new chapter, forged in a partnership with the most innovative, most dynamic, and most brilliant firm in the logistics technology space today. A company that will revolutionize our operations and carry the sterling legacy into the next 50 years. The crowd, sensing the climax, began to applaud. Rick raised a hand to silence them, milking the moment. Please join me, he boomed, his face alight with victory, in welcoming to the stage the incredible Chief Operating Officer of our new partner, Etheria Logistics, Mr. Jasper Kane. The applause was thunder. From a side entrance, Jasper emerged, looking sharp and confident in a dark gray suit. He walked onto the stage with an easy stride and shook Rick's hand firmly. The flashing cameras of the event photographers captured the moment, the old guard and the new, shaking on a deal that would save the former. Rick, practically giddy with relief and pride, kept his arms slung around Jasper's shoulders, a proprietary gesture. He was presenting Jasper as his prize, his salvation. His eyes scanned the crowd, and then they found me again. He couldn't resist one last dig. He hit it directly at me, a wide, smug grin on his face. "See, Skylar?" he called out, his voice amplified by the microphone. The entire room turned to look at me, the designated failure. This man is a real success, a visionary. This is what it looks like when you stop dreaming and start doing. Maybe you can learn something tonight. This was it. The moment of maximum public humiliation. He had handed it to me on a silver platter. I could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on me, a mixture of pity, curiosity, and indifference. I held my chin high and met my uncle's gaze. Jasper stepped up to the microphone. Rick still had his arm around him, beaming like a proud father. "Thank you, Rick," Jasper's voice came, calm and clear, cutting through the residual applause. He paused, letting the room fall completely silent. "But there's a slight misunderstanding I need to clear up." The friendly smile on Uncle Rick's face faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. He looked at Jasper, then out at the audience, then back at Jasper. "What misunderstanding?" "The deal was signed." Jasper gently removed Rick's arm from his shoulder. He turned his body slightly, away from my uncle, and looked directly at me, across the wide expanse of the ballroom. His voice was respectful, formal, and carried to every corner of the silent room. "Ma'am," he said, his eyes locked on mine, "the final press release is on my tablet. It's ready for your final approval whenever you are." The word hung in the air. "Ma'am." Uncle Rick froze. His mind, so used to its own superiority, couldn't process the data. He looked from Jasper to me, a deep, bewildered frown creasing his forehead. What did you just call her?" he stammered, his voice no longer booming. Jasper didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on me, for a moment longer before turning his gaze back to my uncle, and then to the sea of shocked and confused faces in the audience. His expression was no longer just confident, it was commanding. "I think you've misunderstood our corporate structure, Rick," he said, his voice echoing in the dead silence. "I am the Chief Operating Officer. I run the day-to-day." He then lifted his hand and pointed, not with a finger but with an open, respectful gesture directly at me. He declared, his voice ringing with absolute clarity and authority, "is the founder, the owner, and the chief executive officer." He let that sink in for a beat, his hand still pointing. "That's my boss." The silence in the room didn't break, it shattered. It was replaced by a massive, collective intake of breath, a sound like the tide being sucked out to sea. The words founder, owner, CEO, boss, hung in the air, electric and undeniable. Every single person in that ballroom, All the business leaders, the colleagues, the family friends, spun their heads to stare at me. The girl in the simple blue suit, standing quietly at her table. Uncle Rick froze completely. It was a terrifying, absolute stillness. The florid, ruddy color drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy, sickly pale white. His mouth hung slightly open, his eyes wide with a horror so profound it seemed to suck all the air out of his lungs. He was a statue of disbelief. Next to him, at the family table, Brittany's jaw dropped. It was not a delicate, surprised gasp. It was a full, unhinged dislocation of her features, her perfectly painted red lips forming a silent, ugly O. The champagne glass she was holding slipped from her slack fingers and fell to the thick carpet with a soft, dull thud. This was the populated confrontation I had dreamed of, and the ripple effect was devastatingly perfect. The reactions of my supporting cast detonated in a perfect sequential chain. First, my ally, Grandma Maeve, who had been sitting beside me with a serene calm, simply reached over and patted my hand. She didn't look shocked. She looked vindicated. A slow, proud, beaming smile spread across her face. As she looked at me, a silent, powerful confirmation to everyone watching. Her unwavering confidence was the first piece of evidence that this was real. Second, my enabler, my dad, who had been a statue of avoidance all night, finally looked up. His eyes, wide and terrified, darted from me to Jasper on the stage, to his brother's horrified face. His face was a canvas of raw, unfolding panic. The gears were grinding in his mind, trying to reconcile the daughter he pitied with the CEO on display. Sky? He stammered, the name a weak, broken puff of air. He was utterly, completely speechless. His world, built on the simple foundation of his older brother's dominance, had just been leveled. But the final, most damning reaction, the one that sealed my victory in the minds of every important person in that room, came from the neutral observer, Logan Hay. He had been standing beside his fiancée, Brittany, his face an unreadable mask. Now, that mask dissolved. He took a small step away from the frozen, horrified figure of Brittany, and then he slowly, deliberately, began to clap. It wasn't loud, thunderous applause. It was a soft, rhythmic and deeply respectful sound that cut through the shocked silence like a judge's gavel. He looked past Brittany, his eyes finding mine across the room. The polite curiosity was gone, replaced by a look of profound, undisguised admiration and respect. As he clapped, he gave me a sharp, definitive nod. That was the signal. That was the validation from the outside world of finance and power. Logan Hayes, the VC partner, was endorsing this reality. His applause told every other business leader in the room, "This is not a joke. This is not a prank. This is a major power play, and you are witnessing it." Instantly, the tide of opinion turned. The men who had been chuckling at my expense with Rick just minutes ago now stared at him with a mixture of contempt and pity. They looked at me with a new, calculating awe. The family, my family, was suddenly on an island, completely isolated in a sea of shifting allegiances. The mockery they had so freely dispensed had curdled into their own abject public humiliation. Their social standing, their power, their entire worldview, had been shattered in the space of 30 seconds. And I hadn't even said a word yet. The silence held for a moment longer, thick with the wreckage of my family's pride. Then, I began to walk. My heels made a sharp, purposeful clicking sound on the polished floor, the only sound in the enormous room. The crowd, a silent, staring sea of faces, parted for me as if I were royalty. I walked past my father's table. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I walked past Brittany, who was now staring at Logan, her face a mask of betrayal, as he continued his slow, steady applause for me. I reached the stage and walked up the small set of stairs. Jasper, my loyal, brilliant COO, gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod, and stepped back, ceding the spotlight. I took the microphone from the stand. It was cool and heavy in my hand. First, I looked at Jasper. "Thank you, Jasper," I said, my voice steady and clear, amplified through the speakers. It was calm, without a trace of the nervous girl I once was. Then, I turned my gaze to the man who was still frozen in place. My uncle. He looked like he had aged 20 years in 2 minutes. He looked small. Rick, I said, my voice still calm, but with an edge of steel he had never heard before. My team will be in touch with your team on Monday morning. To begin the transition, we'll be conducting a full audit of all departments and executive positions. I let that hang in the air for a second. I'm sure you understand. His only response was a slight, spastic twitch of his eyelid. I then let my eyes drift to Brittany. Her face had crumpled, the mask of beauty and cruelty collapsing into something ugly and pathetic. The final blow wasn't for them, it was for the record. I turned my gaze back out, the audience, to the hundreds of witnesses. For years, I said, my voice resonating with quiet power, my family called me a loser, a nobody. They thought my dreams were useless. My eyes found my uncle's again, locking him in place. The lesson here is simple. Never underestimate the person you've kicked out of the conversation. I paused, letting the final line land with the force of a physical blow. Sometimes, they end up buying the whole building. I placed the microphone back on its stand with a soft click that echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. I turned, walked to the edge of the stage, and stepped down. I didn't look back at the wreckage of their shattered world. I didn't need to. I walked toward the main doors, past the staring faces, my head held high. Grandma Maeve was already there, waiting for me, her arm extended. I took it, and together, we walked out into the cool night air, leaving them all behind in the ruin. My story is proof that the labels other people give you, even your own family, don't have to define you. The best revenge isn't loud or angry, it's building a life so successful and full of your own purpose that their voices become nothing more than irrelevant noise. What labels have you had to overcome in your life? What's the one name someone called you that you refuse to accept? Let me know your story in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this story resonated with you, and if you believe in the power of rewriting your own narrative, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about turning pain into power. Thanks for watching.